working together very hard to extend tax cuts for millionaires. And it absolutely infuriated me. So I called a couple millionaires I know, and a bunch of them wrote a letter to President Obama that basically said, for the good of the country, raise my taxes. And this message was so shocking coming from a bunch of millionaires that it totally blew up in the media. And that group has grown, and we've been working together ever since to raise taxes on millionaires like them. Now, to be clear, we're not a partisan group, and taxes are not a partisan issue. The vast majority of Democrats, the vast majority of Republicans, and the vast majority of independents believe that millionaires and billionaires should pay substantially higher taxes. The only people who disagree with this incredibly unremarkable idea are the politicians running the government. I wonder if it could possibly have anything to do with all those campaign contributions they get from millionaires. Let's think about that. So here's the deal. In World War II, right after World War II, the top marginal income tax rate was 94%. During the Eisenhower years, it was 91%. Today, it is 37%. Who is in charge in Washington has changed countless times over the last 70 years, but the tax rates for the richest people in the country have gone in one direction, down.
Now, most tax negotiations in Congress take place behind closed doors, and in the end, compromise legislation typically comes out with some kind of bipartisan support. It's another form of sausage making. So it's been virtually impossible to point out the blame for where we are today. That changed in 2016 when the Republican Party took over the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. They had so much power, they didn't have to compromise on anything. And in 2017, they used that power to rewrite the whole federal tax code. Every single Democrat voted against the new federal tax code. Almost every Republican voted for it.
And this is actually really lucky because it finally gives us clarity on how at least one side of the political aisle thinks the tax code should be structured. Now, to be clear, some of the bullshit in the tax code has been around for years, but in 2017, Republicans decided to take full responsibility for it. They voted for it, they should own it. You may like some of it or hate all of it. That's really up to you to decide. We just want you to start talking to your lawmakers about taxes, because regardless of who's in charge, Americans deserve a fair tax code, and we don't have one currently.
And y'all, for last year, for the first time in history, billionaires with a B paid a lower effective tax rate than every single other group of taxpayers in America. But how does that even happen? We're going to look at how that happens by comparing a regular person's taxes to a rich person's taxes. Let's begin.
So let's say that two people, we'll call them Joe and Cammie Workhard, both worked full-time last year, putting in 40 hours every week. Together, they made $100,000, just above average for a two-earner household. They're married, so the father taxes jointly. So after paying into Social Security and Medicare and taking the standard deduction, they end up with $75,200 in taxable income.
All right, so here I just want to step back and explain a couple of things. Here is a chart of the federal tax brackets, and it shows how much you pay at each level of income. What we're showing you here is the bracket for married people filing jointly. Everybody gets a standard deduction, and this is, think of it as the amount that the government decides that you need to take care of yourself completely. So you only pay federal taxes if you make above that amount. We have a progressive federal income tax system, meaning that you pay a slightly higher percentage of your income the more money you make. So you can look at this chart and see that after the standard deduction, a married couple filing jointly will pay 10% on that first chunk of their taxable income, 12% on the bit after that, and so on and so forth until they max out at 37% rate for any income over around $622,000. Now, let me emphasize two things here. First, everybody pays the same rate as they move through the tax bracket. So a billionaire pays the same rate on that first taxable bit of income as you do, and so on. And everybody maxes out at 37%, whether they make $622,000 or if they make $622 million.
So back to the workhards. With $75,200 of income after the standard deduction, the workhards will pay 10% on the first chunk and 12% on the rest, for a total federal tax bill of around $8,600.
Now, say two other people, we'll call them Ronald and Melanie Slump. They sit around all year tanning on a beach. One day, Ronald clicks a button on the couple's E-Trade account and sells some stock, making a profit of $100,000. The Slumps would take the standard deduction and be left with $75,200 of taxable income, just like the Workhards. They made the same amount of money, so the Slumps should pay around the same amount in taxes as the Workhards, right, Morris?
Wrong. Under our current system, the Slumps will pay zero in taxes on that income. The Workhards worked hard all year trying to get ahead, while the Slumps, who are already rich, sat on the beach drinking strawberry daiquiris. At the end of the year, the Workhards were almost $9,000 poorer than the Slumps. So why does that happen?
Well, I'll tell you why. It's because the Republican lawmakers who wrote the new federal tax code believe money should be taxed differently depending on how you make it. Here's a comparison with the rates side by side. Like the Workhards, most people, most of you probably on this program, make ordinary income. You work, you make money from that work, you get a paycheck, and taxes come out of your paycheck. Other people, and this is mostly millionaires, make capital gains income. You buy an asset like stock, it goes up in value, you sell it for a profit. That profit is considered a capital gain. As you can see, capital gains income is taxed at a much lower rate than ordinary income.
Let's look at another example. Let's say the Slump sold even more stock and made $400,000 in capital gains profit. They take the standard deduction, then they pay zero on the first $80,000 and 15% on the rest of their taxable income for a total tax bill of around $44,000. The Workhards also had a good year. They got new jobs and they made $400,000 too, working 40 hours a week for 50 weeks. They take the standard deduction and they pay into Social Security and Medicare. At the end of the year, their total federal tax bill is about $82,000. Again, two families make exactly the same amount of money, but the cocktail sipping super tan E-traders end the year about $38,000 richer than the working folks.
So if you actually work for a living, you pay higher taxes than people who live off investments. But that's not the best deal in the new federal tax code. The best deal is to inherit money like I did.
Now, let's say the Workhards got new jobs, singing full-time for America Sings. They are such good singers that America Sings last year paid them $11 million. They pay their Social Security and Medicare, took the standard deduction, and they end up with almost $11 million of taxable income. They pay 10% in the first chunk, 12% in the next chunk, and so on, maxing out at the 37% on all the income over about $622,000. The Workhards' total tax bill for the year was $4 million. Now, making $11 million is hardly a reason to sing Cry Me a River, but how does the Workhards' tax bill compare with a Slump's tax bill?
Well, the Slumps also had a very good year. Mr. Slump's great aunt died and left her entire $11 million estate to the Slumps. Don't worry, they were not close. So how much will the Slumps pay in taxes on their $11 million of inheritance income?
Nothing. Zero. Nada. Neither the aunt's estate nor the Slumps will pay any taxes on that $11 million because when Republican lawmakers rewrote the federal tax code, they exempted the first $11 million of every estate from taxes, $22 million for a couple. Once again, the Workhards and the Slumps took in exactly the same amount of pre-tax income, but because they earned their money in different ways, one couple by working and the other waiting for someone to die, the Slumps ended the year $4 million richer than the Workhards.
Now, you may have thought we broke from England and started our own country because we wanted things here to be different, but take a deep dive into our tax code and you'll hear God Save the Queen playing in the background.
That's right. The Republican lawmakers who wrote the new federal tax code clearly preferred an aristocracy. You want proof? Remember how the capital gains taxes work? You buy stock for $1 million and sell it for $10 million. You only pay taxes on the $9 million you gained. Simple enough. But what if you bought that stock for 1 million? It grew to be worth 10 million, but the day before you're going to sell it, you died and the stock went to your heirs. In the new federal tax code, when your heirs inherit the stock, poof, the tax basis magically changes. Instead of the basis being the $1 million that you paid for the stock, the basis stepped up to $10 million, the value it had on the day that you died. When your heirs sell that stock, they'll only pay taxes on the gains above the new $10 million tax basis. $9 million of capital gains, totally wiped out for tax purposes.
Now there's another gimmick called the 1031 exchange, which deserves extra attention as it benefits a certain well-known real estate developer. The new tax code allows investors to avoid capital gains taxes when they sell a piece of property if they immediately invest it in another property. So let's say a developer buys a building worth 10 million, holds it for a few years, and then sells it for 20 million. He rolls that money into a new $20 million building. A few years later, he sells that building for 60 million and buys 1,000 buildings with that 60 million. The developer started off with one $10 million building and ends up with 1,000 buildings worth 60 million and still has paid no taxes.
You see, when these two tax loopholes work together, millionaire real estate families can acquire billions of dollars worth of property without ever paying a cent in taxes. Let's look at the same situation as before, but instead of selling all those buildings for 60 million, the real estate developer holds onto them until they're worth 200 million. Then he dies. His estate will probably pay some estate tax, but his heirs will inherit all the property at a new basis. If they sell it before it gains any more value, they pay no taxes on all of those gains.
We have to pause here and just think about this for a minute. On one side, we've got a wealthy heir who has never worked, never contributed anything to society, who inherited hundreds of millions of dollars of property and contributed nothing to the country, nothing to build our roads, nothing to keep our water clean, nothing to keep us safe. On the other side are people like the workhards. They go to work, pay their taxes, and do their part for the country every day.
Between 1/3 and 1/2 of all the wealth in America is inherited. Many of the richest people in America are not rich because they did something to earn it. They're rich because their parents or their grandparents or their parents' grandparents did something to earn it. And there's nothing wrong with inheriting money, of course, but there's no good reason that inheritance income should be taxed differently than other kinds of income.
All right, so y'all, we've talked a little bit about personal taxes. Now let's turn to corporations.
In 2018, if you ordered a box of toothpicks from Amazon, you paid more for your delivery than Amazon paid in federal taxes for the entire year. If you watched a single movie on Netflix, you paid more for your subscription than Netflix paid in federal taxes for all of 2018. And if you filled your car up once, you paid more than Chevron paid in federal taxes in 2018. Now, Morris, could you explain how that happens?
Okay, there are a lot of ways how that happens, but one of the main ones is the new federal tax code allows companies to pretend they do business somewhere other than where they actually do business. Let's take a company like Starbucks, for example. Let's say Starbucks has thousands of stores in the United States and a few dozen in Ireland. You'd expect them to pay lots of tax in the United States and much less tax in Ireland. That would make sense. That is not the way it actually works. Most large companies have some kind of intellectual property, a trademark or a patent, for example. Unlike land and buildings, intellectual property can be transferred to another country as fast as you can click the send button on your email. Picture that Starbucks logo. A smart lawyer can transfer ownership of that logo to Starbucks of Ireland, which is then legally own the logo. Starbucks of the US would send royalty payments to Starbucks of Ireland. The company can make the royalty payments whatever they want. If they make the royalty payments big enough, the company will show all of its profits in Ireland, even though they sold hugely more coffee in the United States. Using this and other tricks, 91 of the Fortune 500 companies paid zero taxes, zero. So here we are again. The work cards are holding up their end of the bargain, and everyone else is shirking their responsibilities.
The new Republican tax code also lets some corporations pay only 10.5% on the money they earn overseas. That's half the current corporate tax rate of 21%. And companies can get a big tax cut for all the factories and equipment they own in other countries. The more factories a company has overseas, the more it can cut out of its US tax bill. No wonder we're losing so many American jobs.
Now, rich people and CEOs love pretending there are good reasons why they should get to skip out on taxes. And one of their favorite reasons is that they're job creators. Ooh, job creators, like they're little magicians who create jobs out of thin air just by waving a little wand. Well, I'm a businesswoman and I've got news for you. I am not a job creator. Sure, business people like me start companies and hire employees, but my employees didn't have jobs because of my benevolence or my genius. They had jobs because people needed the marketing software that I'd created. People will have jobs making software and selling software solutions even if I die. Because if people really want marketing technology, another entrepreneur will come along and organize a company to fulfill that demand. Trust me, 5 others already have.
In the lead up to the Republican tax code, there were a lot of CEOs pushing for a lower corporate tax rate. They said they would use those tax cuts to create jobs. They even launched a big job creators bus tour that went all over the country. The CEO of AT&T, Randall Stephenson, was one of the biggest cheerleaders for corporate tax cuts. He was on TV every day, insisting the correlation between tax cuts and job creation was very, very tight, and promising that corporations hired tons of people if only they weren't burdened by having to pay taxes. Now, keep in mind, corporations only pay taxes on profits. Profits are calculated after expenses like payroll are deducted. So Mr. Stevenson's claim doesn't even make sense on its face. But be that as it may, maybe he was just confused. Maybe he thought he would hire more people if the corporate tax rate was lower.
Morris, I just don't think so. You see, from 2008 to 2015, AT&T paid an effective corporate tax rate of 8%, well below the statutory rate at the time of 35%. So with such low taxes, according to Mr. Stevenson, the company must have hired tons of people. Nope. During that period, the company cut 80,000 jobs. And with their low taxes and the saving from the layoffs, they bought back $34 billion worth of AT&T stock. What does that do? It increases the net worth of the executives in the company, like Randall Stephenson. Now, since the new tax code went into effect, AT&T has cut an additional 40,000 jobs. And year before last, it paid Randall Stephenson $32 million.
Erica was just talking about stock buybacks. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, a stock buyback is when a company uses some of its profits to buy up its own stock, making the remaining stock more valuable. This doesn't do anything to change the company's long-term financial health or create jobs, but it does make the people who are paid with stock options, like the millionaire CEOs, a lot of money. In 2017, lots of these CEOs said they would use their corporate tax cuts to hire more people, but that mostly wasn't true. Instead, many of them used the tax cut to buy back their stock and make their executives even richer. The year after the rewrite of the federal tax code, corporate stock buybacks reached an all-time high of almost $1 trillion.
So business people like Kristen don't create jobs. Corporate tax cuts don't create jobs. And stock buybacks really don't create jobs. We're not just regular investors, people like me who invests money in the stock market. We pay half the tax rate of people who actually work for a living. And lawmakers justify that lower tax rate by saying that, oh, if we raise the investors' taxes, they'll stop investing. So are investors in the stock market job creators? No. But let me explain. Apple, for instance, employs thousands of people making computers and iPhones. I am an investor in Apple. I have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Apple stock. The people who work at Apple have jobs because of millions of people who want to buy iPhones, not because of investors like me. None of the money I spent buying Apple stock went to Apple. It went to other investors who happened to be selling their stock that day. Now, to be clear, investors are not going anywhere regardless of the tax rate. The alternative to investing is to stick your money in a mattress. Last I checked, mattresses do not provide very high returns. Any logical person would rather make something and pay taxes on it rather than paying nothing because they earned no money.
All right, so let's leave regular stock market investors aside for the moment and look at private equity investors. So private equity funds actively buy and sell entire companies. Their investors get the special investor tax rate. And even the people who work for them managing the fund, but who have no capital of their own at risk, they also get the special tax rate. Morris, are they job creators?
No, not even close. Look at the example of Toys R Us. Two private equity firms took over Toys R Us. Over the years, the fund managers love to say they saved the company. They created 62,000 jobs in the process. Did they? Well, prior to the private equity takeover, at its peak, Toys R Us had 97,000 employees. The company was then in good financial shape with annual earnings of $252 million, cash on hand over $2 billion. By the time they were done with the company, these private equity job creators had shut down all 735 US stores, loaded its once positive balance sheet with over $8 billion in debt. The investors, they made $470 million. And they destroyed the company and cost nearly 100,000 people their jobs. And they paid half the tax rate on that money as you guys who actually work for a living.
So let's see if I have the picture here. The new federal tax code makes it easy for corporations to skip out on taxes. It gives advantages to people who already have money or inherit money over people who work for a living. And as you get richer and richer, there are more ways to get out of paying your fair share. Is that the picture, Morris? Have I got it right?
Yes. And the result of all that is our country is more unequal now than it has been in 100 years. The top 1% owns 40% of all the jobs, of all the wealth in this country. Since 1990, their wealth has tripled. The bottom half of our citizens has seen no wealth growth at all. It's like...
You can go ahead and say it, Morris, but I'll say it for you. It's like some sick game of economic Django where we just keep on taking money from the people at the bottom and in the middle and giving it to the people at the very top. And as you can imagine, it's destabilizing the whole country.
And people are taking to the streets. They have different reasons for protesting, but as a whole, our citizens just can't take it anymore. They're sick of seeing a few ridiculously rich people get everything, while millions of people are being treated like second and third class citizens. Regular working people pay twice the taxes that I pay. So even if you have the same income I do, you end every year further worse off.
In America today, deaths of despair, deaths from suicide, alcohol, and drugs are at their highest level ever recorded. 2.5 million people are addicted to opioids. And for the first time in our history, life expectancy is going down for segments of the population. With COVID, things have gotten worse. Millions of people are unemployed and businesses across the country have gone under, many permanently. But to look at the stock market, you would never know how bad things are. And here is a troubling fact. In the first year of the pandemic, while over 500,000 people died, US billionaires saw their wealth increase $1.3 trillion.
Y'all, the most important thing to understand is that none of this just happened. Over time, in a variety of ways, a relatively small group of people used the tax code to restructure the economy so that it would produce results that are fabulous for them and pretty bad for everybody else. These people want to live in a country with a tiny number of very wealthy people, no middle class, and a permanent underclass. I do not understand why somebody would want to live in that kind of country. I think it is so weird. but you can't escape from the results of the tax system that they have put in place. Now, the good news is we can fix all of this, but we have to have your help to fix it. If Americans are paying attention, we can have the kind of tax code we want, regardless of who's in charge. So anyway, if you want to learn more, buy our book, Tax the Rich, go to taxtherich.com, host a presentation like this for your pals. We would love to do it. And just join the fight to tax the rich and save America. And now we're excited to hear from everybody and take questions. Thank you so much. And again, big thanks to y'all for hosting us. So should we do some fabulous questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. I totally am on board with everything you guys said. I have one question. Coming from a farming background, you talked a little bit about one exchange and capital gains. We see family farms that you could look back, your dad, your grandpa worked all their lives, worked hard to tie everything together, maybe had a job in town. Capital gains, if the way that is structured, it can roll over with the inheritance tax, or to word this right, how do you keep family farms in families if they had to pay capital gains tax?
I'll kick this one to Morris to start.
Well, first of all, we're only even our proposals are only proposing taxing capital gains for people who make millions of dollars. At least I grew up in a farming area too. That was dairy farming, not hogs and corn like you have in Iowa, but I grew up near the Canadian border in the northern part of New York State, just south of the Canadian border. We don't know of a lot of farms who are people who are making tens of millions of dollars worth of farmland. And those that do are not exactly what we call families. They're more like corporations owned by investors. So we're not really talking about family farmers. The people that we're talking about are millionaires, some of whom may invest in farmland, but they're not actually too many working farmers that we know of who are millionaires.
I also want to say, Dave, just on the family farm issue, that we hear this so often, and it just actually doesn't happen very often. Kristi Noem, who's the governor of South Dakota, went on like a huge hoopla gripe session about how her family had ended up having an issue with the tax code and all of this. And she painted this sob story, and a few journalists did like some relatively light digging and found that it was basically nonsense. And her mother was still alive, her dad, like they could have owned the farm together. I mean, the details of it are not really important, but the story was not accurate. Okay. And most of the family farm stories, as you hear them, are simply not accurate.
And that's what I ask, because I know I'm going to get asked that question of how do you keep family farms and families, and not have the wealthy bid against you without, some type of incentive to keep it there.
I think there's a
the way the corporate structure is set up.
There is a little memory lag there, particularly for multi-generational families, because in the 60s and 70s, the estate tax rate was pretty low, and it was catching closely held small businesses, some small farms. But now the exemptions are so high, as we said, 11 million. Now it's like almost 12 million for an individual, almost 24 million for a couple. That's when the estate tax starts. And there's still all these carve out for closely held family businesses and farms, meaning there's lower valuations. So we're talking about the estate tax is not going to hit anybody with a farm probably worth less than $30 million. Now,
Dave, if you have a farm that's worth $30 million, I think that you should pay some extra taxes.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
I don't.
Seriously, if your farm is worth that much, I'm just going to go on and say, yes, your family farm should pay higher taxes.
Right.
Or your kids.
You have a $30 million farm.
Your kids should pay some taxes at the time that they inherit the farm from you. Not that you should pay their taxes.
I'll jump to some.
Most time you're talking 100 acres, 200 acres, it's not thousands of acres.
Right.
And that's what you're trying to keep, that's what families want to keep in their family farming operation.
Let's turn to some questions in the chat. So if we raise taxes on the rich, won't they all move away? Kristen.
They will not move away. Because the simple fact is that in most countries, the tax rate is exceptionally higher. The friends of mine that are uber wealthy that are moving out of places like France and going to places like Belgium. They're not moving out of the US. We have one of the lowest tax rates, I believe, in the world. I don't know what the comparison is, Erica, but this is a great country, a great place to live, and people are not going to leave just because their taxes are raised.
Any other comments, Morris or Chuck?
Sure. I mean, we have an office literally in the shadow of the Flatiron Building. If you check in the afternoon, people are moving into that neighborhood. They're not moving out. People from all over the world are moving into New York City and California and Oregon and parts of the United States, because that's where people are building businesses, and that's where there's people that have resources to spend money and support those businesses. People are not moving to low tax places. I know very few people that are moving to, to the eastern northeast part of Africa in order to start businesses there, even though taxes are much lower there.
All right, so let's say I hear the IRS is letting rich people skip out on what they owe. How do we change that? And what does the IRS need? Chuck?
Yeah,
I just wrote a great new book. Chuck, should we plug your book? Where is it? Go ahead. Answer the question.
Well, yes, we need to invest in the IRS. You're 4 times more likely to get audited if you use the earned income credit, which is working families, than if you're one of the wealthiest taxpayers using some exotic, tax loophole. So we need to invest in rebuilding the IRS's ability to do oversight. And Erica's kindly mentioned I have a new book out called The Wealth Hoarders: How Billionaires Pay Millions to Hide Trillions. And it's about how wealthy people pay their advisors to help them play these shell games with their wealth and assets. And a big part of that can be fixed by just having a vigorous oversight, an IRS that can follow the money and close down some of these dodges and tax loopholes. So, and then we had a program with Ro Khanna, one of the U.S. members of Congress, who's advocating something called the Stop Tax Cheat legislation to invest in the IRS's capacity to oversee the wealthy wealth hiders.
So Jim says tax rates are important, but tax loopholes seem even more so. You mentioned transferring profits to foreign subsidiaries and capital gains and inheritance. What are some others, like qualified dividends? I'll kick this one to Morris.
Well, yes, there are all kinds of crazy loopholes in the system. One of the others that we use, for an example, is that a lot of fund managers, like people that manage hedge funds, sort of pretend to be partners with their investors, and they should get the same tax breaks that their investors get. That's called carried interest loophole, which was actually expanded in the recent tax bill. And there are a lot of them. We discussed the ones in the prepared presentation that we think are the most important, but basically we think that all income should be taxed at the same kinds of rates, whether you get it from working, whether you get it from investing, whether you get it from waiting for people to die, whether you get it from some other way. And yeah, there are a lot of loopholes in the system, and that's part of the problem.
So Donna says, I'm curious that you say we can change this no matter who is in charge. It feels like we're powerless right now with the Senate basically non-functional. How can we change this? I mean, I guess you can't change it no matter who's in charge, but like voters actually are in charge. And I think it's really important for you all, especially here in Iowa. I mean, Chuck Grassley ushered this through, period. He was the head of the Senate Finance Committee. He is currently the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee. Your senator was a lead architect on the tax code that we just described to you. If you think that that's okay, then you should continue to support him in multiple ways. If you think that this tax code is absurd, disgusting, and is leading to the kind of society that you don't want to raise your children in, and you feel like things are breaking down, and it is probably because a tiny number of rich people have an enormous amount of wealth because they have an enormous amount of political power, you should call your senator, Chuck Grassley, and talk to him about that. Because he is unlikely to listen to people outside of Iowa, but he is very likely to listen to you. And this is, at the end of the day, if I can be so blunt, this is a battle between voters and working people and rich donors to politicians. Voters can win this battle. They will not win it if they don't engage in this battle. And that includes learning about the myriad ways you are being totally screwed by a tax code that has rigged the economy against you.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by everybody in charge. Now, some of the people, they're going to listen to their donors, so you got to get rid of them. But I mean, your basic politician wants to be elected more than he wants to be friends with his donors. Because if he gets elected, then he gets to be more friends with donors. Do you see what I'm saying? So, I mean, they do ultimately listen to you all more. You just have to talk louder.
We went to Grassley's office. They said the problem in Iowa was that people won't work because they can get enough unemployment that they don't have to. And that's what he said needs to be changed to get Iowa back to work.
That was his big idea for making Iowa better. Okay, so let's see. Keith says that IRS info on family farms shows that most family farms issues are buyouts of non-farm heirs, not federal estate taxes. There is a 15-year payoff for federal estate tax if it's greater than 65% of the estate for the farm assets. So that's a little more detail on that family farm issue. But Dave, I think that we could do we could do a separate presentation for you all about the family farm issue. And that might be really helpful because that's something that comes up a lot for you all. That is one of these, is it a canard or whatever that thing is where like it doesn't really matter? You know what I'm saying? It's one of those, but we can dive into that some more for y'all if you want to have us back. Let's see. Why do we only fund Social Security from wages and not from other forms of income? This ends up being fairly regressive. Who wants to take that one? Morris, I always kick it to you.
Well,
Morris, take that one.
Yeah, it's correct. Now that's correct. We do. It is regressive. I mean, the justification is the fact that the people get different amounts of Social Security benefits based on how much money they put into Social Security. So rich people who make a lot of investment income but don't put into Social Security don't get any Social Security benefits either. So, I mean, there is some logic behind it, but yeah, it is regressive. And I suggest that it be changed.
Wait, one proposal is simply to raise the cap. At this point, if millionaires are done paying into the Social Security Trust Fund, sometime early January, and nurses and workers and farmers are paying until December 31st. So you can raise the cap or eliminate. Some people even advocate scrap the cap and just have the Social Security withholding taken out of all forms of income. And that would instantly both reduce the regressivity of Social Security, and it would increase its solvency for the next century.
And so one of the things they're talking about is that like the Social Security cap, you only pay Social Security on like up to about 130 or something, and you don't pay any Social Security on capital gains at all. But as Morris said, you are in effect buying insurance. And so there's there's a reasonable debate to an extent to be had about that. So JD, Ross, and Dave, what do you all say in town halls about taxes to your more conservative constituents? How do you talk to them? And then what middle ground do we have? Thoughts on that?
I'll let Ross start.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the conversation. I think, a lot of this is when I talk to folks right now, hurt people. And you talked about that variable when we see deaths by suicide increasing, whether that be on the farm or that be from folks who are working in manufacturing, meatpacking plants. But there seems to be this sense that the rich or the wealthy are untouchable. And so for me and for Dave and even for JD, when we're talking to people in our town halls in our community, it's important that we're armed with information. And one thing that we know is prevalent in Iowa small towns is that we talk about the corporate tax rate so much at the Capitol, and that being one of these carrots that are going to keep manufacturing industry here in Iowa. But one of our major issues is that we have out-of-state corporations that come in and will buy up an old mom and pop shop, bleed it for all it's got, leave that shell and go somewhere else and do it again. And so one thing that we have to talk about is making sure we're taking care of home and making sure we have a competition in workforce, but also an ability to earn. And it's really enlightening here, the conversation that we've had. But I would ask you all, what are a couple of things that we can talk to our everyday folks about at our coffee shops, or how we chip away at this thing? Because we don't want folks to be paralysis through analysis. There's a lot to work on here. Chuck, I've listened to a couple of your TED Talks, and I think we have to give folks the ability to feel empowered, some efficacy on how we have these conversations and what they can do when it comes to voting out people like Chuck Grassley, but asking him difficult questions regarding tax structure.
I think one of the easiest opening conversations we found is their money versus your sweat. You know, the idea that Morris and I can make exactly the same amount of money, and I work my ass off every day, 40 hours a week, if not more, 50 weeks a year, you know, and he ends up richer than I do if he made the same amount of money. I mean, that is absurd. It's actually absurd that, like, literally two people, same amount of money, one worked, one either waited for somebody to die or made money off of money they already had, and this person ends the year poorer. It's illogical on its face, and I think working people don't really understand that. I'll tell you, even our staff who work on tax issues every day and they intellectually know all this, when we put this presentation together and started working on it, and you see that when the people become singers, their tax bill is $4 million more than the person who sat around waiting for some relative to kick it. Come on. This is America. Come on.
Yeah, my total taxes are, as a percentage of my taxable income, is in the teens.
All right, let's see. Can you comment on a value added tax? That's a great question. I'm going to kick that one to Morris too.
Or I don't think it's a good idea. It's like having a sales tax. And so people who are like just living on the edge of, hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, they'll be paying a much higher percentage of their income in taxes than investors do, because I don't spend that much more money than other people do. So that'd basically be a regressive tax. Poor people would pay a much higher percentage of income in value-added tax or sales tax than would rich people. So I don't think that would be a good idea. No.
So Cornelia asked, my understanding is that Biden's proposed jobs bill will raise the corporate tax rate, but it doesn't deal with any of the tax loopholes you are discussing. Is that right? And I can address this big one about, without going into too much detail, this part of the presentation where we talk about people moving, like pretending they do business one place and they really do it in another place, and then the 50% off coupon. The proposal that Biden has put out actually deals with that relatively effectively. His proposal still has to be turned into legislation. In the crafting of the legislation and figuring out how they're going to get the votes, that piece of his proposal could be watered down. The goal over the next several months is to use this opportunity for infrastructure funding to make those changes. And he has proposed changes that would correct this problem. When I tell you the corporate lobbyists are starting to buy extra Christmas presents in June or April for their kids, I mean, the money is pouring into K Street lobbyists for this specific piece of Biden's proposal. So that will be where you will see a huge amount of, or where you won't see, but should be able to see a huge amount of backdoor negotiation, where the corporations are going to try to get as much of that cut out of the final legislation as possible. Any other comments from our panelists about that piece? Okay, let's see. I think, paying taxes used to be patriotic, but now it's viewed negatively and almost un-American. What's the best messaging to turn this around? Well, I decided to call this group the most obnoxious name in all of history, the Patriotic Millionaires. And every single one of our members, I just have to tell you, they absolutely hate the name. But I felt like that was a really essential branding. I mean, I think you either love your money or you love your country. And if you love your money more than your country, move. Because we got things we got to do. And this is about patriotism. Kristen?
I think too, Erica, and I see this happening among a lot of folks that I know. I live in a rural community as well in Oregon, is that people all of a sudden have this idea that they should be able to cherry pick what they pay taxes for. Like, oh, well, I don't live in a big city, so like, why do I need to, pay taxes for this? Or like, now we have half of Eastern Oregon that wants to secede from Western Oregon because they don't like big city values and they don't want to pay, even though that I-5 corridor in Oregon pays for most of the services that happen in Eastern Oregon. How I combat those conversations is like, I don't have children, but I love paying taxes for schools because I don't want to live in a society of uneducated people. So, we all have to do our fair share. I think paying taxes is one of the more patriotic acts that you can do. We all have to do our part.
That was one of the goals of branding this organization 10 years ago when we started it. I was just emotionally incredibly sick of hearing presidential candidates brag about how low the tax rate was that they paid. And why would you ever hire a CEO to be CEO of your company if they refuse to invest in your company? And so running for president and bragging about how little you pay to support the country just struck me as really kind of gross. And so one of the long-term goals is to make it embarrassing and unseemly for candidates at any level of office to brag about how little they contribute to the things that we all need to do together. There's one question here. I know we have to break in just a second. Let me just do the last question because I wanted to, she said, did you mean something about a flat tax? We do not support a flat tax, to be clear. One of the problems with the current tax code is that there are not enough tax brackets. And so somebody who makes $622,000, as we say in the presentation, is taxed at the same rate as somebody who makes 622 million. Our long-term goal is to have multiple tax brackets, because it doesn't matter. You just look at it, it's not more complicated, so have one at 1, one at 5, one at 10, one at 25, and have those increasingly go up to, 70 to 90% when you're at the $100 million level. So I think, should we wrap? Are there any closing thoughts from JD, Dave, or Ross, or from our panelists? JD, you want to shut us? Close it up?
Dave, you want to say anything to close? Like, I think one other thing is let folks know where they can find you on social media too. This goes for Patriotic Millionaires as well.
Oh, fabulous. So taxtherich.com is our website. It has a ton of information on it. Patriotic Mills is our Twitter handle. Patrioticmillionaires.org is our website. And just one last thing, Dennis says, don't keep saying waiting for someone to die when referencing the inheritance tax. No one is waiting for somebody to die. Likely they are deeply saddened by that. The way you state it makes it sound like people are looking for that as a way to get ahead. Dennis, I hear you. I hear you. Thank you for that suggestion. I appreciate it. Some people are kind of waiting for somebody to die, but be that as it may, that's not a job. I think that's our only point. We want to emphasize that you understand. But I apologize, Dennis. I hear you, and I thank you for that comment. JD, you want to close this up?
Sure. Quick, Dave and Ross, do you guys want to mention where people can find you? Dave?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Facebook at Mobile Momentum. I have a Twitter account, Dave Mobauer. I gotta just say, I appreciate this conversation tonight. You guys have very good insight to what's going on. It's hard, I agree with what you guys are saying. To get our country back on track, we have to have a fair system of how it plays out. And you guys are on track. And the thing I hear at the coffee shops, I just went to coffee this morning and had breakfast. It's that wealth divide. I mean, the middle class and the lower class, they pit us against each other, but we're becoming one and the same. And the wealthier, they're getting through those loopholes. And yeah, we have to protect our local people, our family farms, our mom and pop shops. And I applaud you guys for what you're doing.
No, I appreciate all that you're doing, the messaging. I mean, Iowa, we're seeing the conversation in taxes shift a little bit. Folks fees are becoming synonymous with taxes, right? We're lowering taxes and raising fees. I'll pay a little bit more for my turkey tags this year, right? And I don't have that much more money in my bank account. So I know a lot of Iowans are feeling that same way, but I appreciate you all bringing this into light. Our goal is to support the common good. And so no matter how much money you make, right, our goal should be turning that over so we all can support the common good. That's what built our country to be the strong power that it is. And that's how we maintain that. And so I look forward to continue to engage the conversation. You can find me on Facebook at Ross Smith State Representative and on Twitter at Ross Smith 62. I'm at rossmith62.com.
Wonderful. And Patriotic Millionaires, if you guys want to do one on farm tax and inheritance tax, I think we would have enough folks to want to do something. And my one thing that I would like to do is I'm talk about building the Dollar General Coalition. Dollar Generals are taking away our local grocery stores. In Minnesota, they said in 5 years, there was an article that there won't be a local grocery store. They get these huge tax breaks. Our local grocery stores don't. I think that's another avenue that we can talk about if we do this again. So with that, I'm so grateful for you guys to be here tonight. I love this, and looking forward to working with you in the future.
JD, you can count Oregon in for family farms as well. We'd love to be part of that.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll do a two-state one. JD, we so deeply appreciate it. Dave and Ross, it was wonderful to be with you. And y'all,
Yeah.
again, if you want to host one of these for a group of folks, we love to do these. So just go to taxtherich.com and sign up. All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.